Hello, everyone, and warm greetings from Austin, Texas. Firstly, I'd really like to thank the amazing team that's presiding and organizing the festival to have me participate remotely. Big thank you. I hope you're enjoying the festival atmosphere at the conference because now I want to take you back in time to 1816 in search of Victor Frankenstein's womb. Climate change was very real in this year of no summer. Volcanic ash and industrial soot had covered the blue skies in many parts of the world, including Villa Diodati in Switzerland. As we move there, allow me to transition screen to paintings from the Enlightenment and Romantic era that add meaning to my proposition. All right, there. So, cold, incessant rains kept Mary Shelly, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, and his personal physician Polidori indoors that day. Lord Byron challenges them to write their most terrifying horror story, and emerging from this unnatural night and Mary Shelley's tragic personal life comes a masterpiece in Gothic horror and the first science fiction, Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus. Victor Frankenstein, an ambitious scientist of the Enlightenment age, constructs a chemical-mechanical womb to create a frightful humanoid. He abandons this daemon, D-A-E-M-O-N, and then chases him to his own death. Popular understanding of the book presents this chase as the revenge of a hero from a monster that killed his loved ones. But this idea is just as faulted as that of Frankenstein being the name of the monster. In fact, this story unfolds as a pilgrimage of a hero, Victor, through great Mother Nature, led by his son, the creature, who has his father accept the mortality of human ambitions. Let's take a deeper look at the potent feminine presence of nature in the story and the hero's complex anima, the feminine element of male psyche. The pervasive but silent presence of the feminine is not just limited to the story, but is also in its publishing. Shelley published this book anonymously to avoid the male glance and the expected critique that would come with it. Her female characters are passive recipients of male ideas. They receive praise for the saintly quality of suffering. Their victimhood is unsalvageable, and their heroism is complete in the service of the family. This absence of an active heroine in the story deprives Victor of an acceptance of his internal anima as he pursues his ambitious goals to conquer the most precious secret of nature, but meets his own death. Nature is not just used for atmospheric effect of storms and dark clouds in this Gothic novel, or even as an elemental force to be conquered by natural science enthusiasts. Nature here is Great Mother that beckons Victor's friend Walton as the, quote, secret of the magnet, close quote. It drives Victor's curiosities, quote, natural philosophy is the genius that has regulated my fate, he tells Walton. Nature consoles Victor as he weeps like a child and talks to the Jura Ranges after the death of his little brother Willem. Nature lifts his spirits as he rides his mule around the magnificent Mont Blanc, where he says, quote, the very winds whispered in soothing accents, and maternal nature had me weep no more. The one time nature does not commune with him is at Ingolstadt, where he is animating life in his solitary lab. But the second time Victor tries to create life, he does choose nature, a remote island in the Orkneys, where he decides to abandon creating a female companion for the creature. Agitated with Victor's decision, the creature murders Victor's bride and then dares him to a chase to death. He leaves marks in nature to guide him from Geneva through the Mediterranean, across Russia, to the frozen ocean. All along, the spirits and nature nourish and revive Victor so he might, quote, retain strength and fulfill pilgrimage, close quote. thus employing an entire ecosystem of the real and the surreal to carry the male spirit on a pilgrimage through nature. Shelley perhaps becomes the first ecofeminist writer. Ecofeminism is a movement that brings ecology and women's concerns and connections together. The interconnected spirit of the wise woman traveled through antiquity in the mythologies of priestesses, witches, and female warriors. In the Middle Ages, this spirit spoke in the continuous rebellion of serfs and peasants for land. Besides their suffering in the early Middle Ages, Silvia Federici writes that, quote, sexual division of labor, far from being a source of isolation, was a source of power and protection for women. Federici is a scholar of feminist Marxist tradition. We do see this interdependent dynamic between Felix and his sister Agatha of the de Lacy family, who the creature idolized, as he narrates, quote, in the midst of party and want, Felix carried with pleasure to his sister the first little white flower that peeped out from beneath the snowy ground. The ecofeminist spirit inspired the urban medieval women of the 14th century, who Federici writes, quote, were becoming school teachers as well as doctors and surgeons and were beginning to compete with university-trained men. By the end of the medieval period, with increased urbanization, women started to get pushed out of all common professions into the home as raw material for producing more labor bodies. Federici writes that, quote, this was for women a historic defeat. With their expulsion from the caste and the devaluation of reproductive labor, poverty became feminized. Soon, the witch hunts began, a sweeping suppression of the feminine healing spirit that lasted well into the age of enlightenment. Alchemist Paracelsus of the 16th century and father of modern medicine was in search of the elixir of life, and so powerful was his influence of witch healers' knowledge that he burned his text on pharmaceuticals, confessing that he had, quote, learned from the sorceress all he knew. But with the persecution of witches, fear and death silenced the proto-feminists to make way for scientific inquiry in the age of reason. The European medical system of the 17th and 18th century encouraged scientists to make bold research claims. It was also necessary then to emancipate medicine from illogical practices, like folklore medicine. For medical science, this was akin to a rite of passage. Newton, the father of modern science, and many scientists of his time covertly continued the search for the philosopher's stone. Victor, just like Newton, secretly harbored great veneration of the mystical philosophers. But his professors of natural philosophies, Monsieur Crampet, was quick to ridicule his reading of these scientists. I little expected in this enlightened and scientific age to find a disciple of Albertus Magnus and Paracelsus. My dear sir, you must begin your studies entirely anew. Professor Wallman, Victor's professor for modern chemistry, stirred Victor's soul during a lecture as he asked his students to pioneer a new way, explore unknown powers, and unfold to the world the deepest mysteries of creation. He derided the ancient teachers of mystical science, but when he privately met Victor, he reassured him that Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus were, quote, the men to whose indefatigable zeal modern philosophers were indebted for most of the foundations of their knowledge, close quote. Now, this duality in approach of the unknown igniting the known and vice versa was a marker of the times of Mary Shelly as she grew up. But invisible in this progression were the persecuted witches, the superstitious alchemists, and the women who could never study at the universities, all lurking in the dark recess of enlightenment. This dark recess produce the monster of Frankenstein. In his university at Ingolstadt, Victor, surrounded by other ambitious, brilliant men, forgot his family in pursuit of the elixir of life. He sat examining worms decomposing the dead in the churchyard and discovered the secret recipe of life. His expanded ego made a gigantic creature, pride fueling his fatigue with the idea that, quote, no father could claim the gratitude of his sons so completely as I should deserve theirs. In this quote, Shelley displays the core of Victor's purpose, creating a superior species independent of women. Victor turns away from his ugly creation and sleeps in exhaustion. He dreams of kissing his sweetheart Elizabeth, who turns pale as death and transforms to the corpse of his mother as the worms from the churchyard infest his flannel sheets. Carl Jung, founder of analytical psychology, writes that the task of the hero is to, quote, liberate the anima as the inner component of the psyche, which is necessary for any true creative achievement. In Jung's interpretation, then, Elizabeth's transmogrification could be the ill-formed female unconscious or anima of Victor's psyche, and that is not ready to be liberated by the devouring aspect of the mother image or his deep attachment to his own mother. Victor wakes up from his nightmare only to see the animated horror of his creation, and thereon is filled with disgust and abhorrence. The male medical gaze, fixated on the condition of the body and its diseases, misses the beautiful mind of the creature and its need for attachment. Victor's lab was a microcosm of the many teaching hospitals and clinics flourishing across the Europe in the 19th century. As more land got structured into an urban environment during the Industrial Revolution, more labor moved to the wage-doling factories and off the farms. The creature follows a similar evolution after his birth, as he moves on from depleted part of the forest to a village where he gets pelted by the folks and finds refuge in the hovel adjacent to the small cottage inhabited by the de Lacys. Ostracized, just like him, they are mostly melancholic, and the creature gradually discovered that the reason was poverty. But as Safi, the long-separated sweet Arabian, joins their family, he realizes that, quote, they loved and sympathized with one another, and their joys, depending on each other, were not interrupted by causalities that took place around them. Deep ecology, a phrase introduced by eco-philosopher Arne Naess, differentiates itself from the current anthropocentric or human-centric idea of sustainable growth benefiting from the ecology to a more systems-based understanding of respecting value inherent in all living beings. By placing the de Lacy family at the center of the circle of the three stories in her novel, Shelley allows us to see this deep ecology core from where the wholeness of human experience emerge. Vandana Shiva, prominent ecofeminist, explains that the feminist perspective to environmentalism is broader and deeper because it locates production and consumption within the context of regeneration. On the contrary, the reductionist approach of Victor to dissect parts of the whole, sew it together, and infuse a spark of being makes his mechanical womb a passive receptacle, bereft of feminine creative force. Victor used nature only as raw material, and as the first mad scientist trope, his story is frightfully a precursor of biotechnology's modern quest to perfectly simulate the womb. Women will then be unnecessary. The invisible hand of state and church that either define the sexual and reproductive lives of women is now the invisible hand of corporate science, both for demographic control. Arne Naess writes that, quote, the flourishing of non-human life requires a smaller human population. At once, this makes the deep ecology movement sound generally misanthropic and as a precursor to neocolonialism to leaders of the developing country. Victor laments in hindsight that if no man allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with the tranquility of his domestic affections, Greek had not been enslaved. Caesar would have spared his country. America would have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and Peru had not been destroyed. However, he alone decided that his creature shall have no bride. Who then decides the extent and reach of a smaller human population? Will there be an urban rural divide to be managed? Or will the teeming poor give way to the capitalist kings? Will the consent of women be involved or manipulated and managed like over centuries? In having Safi and the creature cry over Native Americans and then celebrate Clerval's enthusiasm over colonization of India, Shelley creates contradictions in managing human race that get condensed in Victor's manifestation of the male womb: incompetent, uncertain, egoistic. As Victor chases his faint, he says, quote, "A spirit of good followed and directed my steps." The spirit of the very family Victor had isolated himself from during the creation of the daemon was now his source of strength. The creature could have killed Victor with little effort, but in this northward final journey of father and son, the necessary pilgrimage through nature was complete. Victor's human form mingled into the soul when tired, was raised to the clouds when thirsty, subsisted on what was given by nature, and gained vigor from the mystical world of dreams. He accepted them all in his horrible pilgrimage. Satish Kumar, activist eco-philosopher, coined the term reverential ecology. That calls on feeling of reverence towards the divinity in all life. Kumar says that caring for the natural environment, soil, maintaining personal well-being, soul, and upholding human values, society, are the moral imperatives of our time. Shelley, in making Victor chase the monster, is making him encounter these basic ideas of reverential ecology: soil, soul, and society. Now, Mary Wollstonecraft, Shelley's mother, could not have become the first feminist thinker on the forgiving ideas of Eastern wisdom. The ideas of liberty and equality bolstered her to appeal to men of reason for the equal rights of women. Mary Shelley, as a counterculture iconoclast of her own times, was perhaps more inspired by the failure of her mother's voice to penetrate the male mind. Failure of the French Revolution, destruction of rural lifestyle, and the continuous ravages of epidemics made the idea of individual liberty look impossible. With better productivity and increased sanitization, population was surging, while greenhouse emissions from industrial coal marked the beginning of global warming and a receding nature. Wollstonecraft's oeuvre, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, and other letters would stay silent in the mind of Shelley and find an imprint in the submissive women in Frankenstein who expose the proud but vulnerable male subconscious. Diotima, the consulting priestess of Socrates, mentions that Eros, or love, is a daemon, D-A-E-M-O-N, an entity that exists in between the heavenly realms and human society. The gods mingle and converse with the humans by these daemons. Shelley, in the muted voice of a priestess, shows mankind that daemons abound in our world and have the potential to turn to demons or friends based on our own personal ethics. In a life full of hardship, she went on to become one of the most popular authors of her era and also edited Percy Shelley's poems, transitioning his image from a quote, atheist, free love, anti-government, radical husband to a Victorian martyr. Her text goes to the deep recess of human mind and repeatedly brings new meaning to generations of seekers of the terrestrial and the celestial. According to Jung, the animus, or the inner man of a woman, is in its final stage of development. It gives the woman, quote, spiritual firmness, an invisible inner support that compensates for her outer softness, and ideas that stimulate men to new enterprises. This emergence of the inner man in Shelley at Villa Diodati was after a long and painfully slow process of self-discovery. Each of her individual relations were tragic, but Shelley learned to mold these horrors into this dark, beautiful story by harnessing her creativity and inner animus. In finally finding her resting place next to the grave of her mother, Shelley reminds mortals of the necessity for reason and self-expression to coexist within the nature of the self. Likewise, if the Damon had lived and died alongside his father, he might still be unmistakably called Frankenstein. Thank you for listening. I hope to stay in touch with many of you via email or otherwise. And happy Halloween.